In the dry, sun-scorched cliffs near the Dead Sea, a shepherd boy tossed a stone into a cave in 1947 and heard the unexpected sound of shattering pottery. What he found inside would rewrite history. Hidden for nearly 2,000 years, tucked away in clay jars, were the Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient manuscripts so profound, so mysterious, that even now, decades after their discovery, they still guard secrets we've only begun to unravel. Who wrote them? Why were they hidden so carefully? And what forbidden knowledge might they still hold? Imagine holding a piece of parchment older than Christianity itself, its ink faded but its words still humming with urgency. These scrolls aren't just relics, they're time capsules, preserving voices from a forgotten world. Some call them the greatest archaeological find of the 20th century, while others whisper they're a puzzle no one has fully solved. From shadowy caves to high-stakes academic rivalries, the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls is a thriller wrapped in ancient mystery, and it all began with a single stone thrown by a boy who had no idea he'd just cracked open a door to the past. But here's what makes this discovery even more extraordinary. These texts weren't just hidden, they were buried with purpose. Someone went to incredible lengths to protect them, sealing them away as if guarding a truth too dangerous to leave exposed. Were they sacred scriptures meant to survive persecution, lost teachings of a radical sect, or something even darker? As we peel back the layers of this enigma, we'll uncover why scholars still argue over their meaning, why governments once fought to control them, and how these fragile scrolls might hold clues to mysteries that stretch far beyond their desert hiding place. This isn't just a story about old manuscripts, it's a journey into the heart of history's most tantalizing secret. The arid climate of the Judean desert played the ultimate preservationist, locking away the Dead Sea Scrolls in a time capsule of dry air and darkness for centuries. When that young Bedouin shepherd, Muhammad ed-Dihib, chased a stray goat into those cliffs near Qumran, he wasn't just uncovering pottery shards, he was stumbling upon the literary equivalent of a buried treasure chest. Inside those cracked clay jars lay leather and papyrus scrolls, brittle yet miraculously intact, their Hebrew and Aramaic script still legible despite being written 2,000 years earlier. Word of the find spread like wildfire among antiquities dealers, but when scholars first laid eyes on the fragments, their hands must have trembled. Here were biblical texts predating any known versions by 1,000 years, alongside mysterious sectarian writings no one had ever seen. Initial examinations revealed something extraordinary. These weren't just copies of familiar scriptures. Some scrolls matched the book of Isaiah nearly word for word, proving the astonishing accuracy of later manuscripts. Others contained radical psalms, apocalyptic visions, and strict communal rules from an isolated Jewish sect, possibly the Essenes, who may have hidden their library as Roman legions marched toward Jerusalem. The dry desert air had perfectly preserved not just the ink but the urgency in these words. You could almost feel the scribes' desperation as they sealed the jars, hoping someday someone would find their buried truth. For archaeologists, the real shock came when they realized this wasn't just one lucky cave. Over the next decade, explorers would comb through 11 Qumran caves, unearthing over 900 manuscripts in all. Each discovery raised more questions. Why were there multiple copies of the same texts? Who decided which writings deserved protection? And most haunting of all, were there still caves out there, untouched, waiting to reveal even darker secrets? The desert had kept its silence for 2 millennia, but now, piece by fragile piece, the scrolls began to whisper. Unrolling these ancient manuscripts is like stepping into the hidden corridors of history, where sacred texts mingle with forbidden knowledge, and every scrap of parchment forces us to rethink what we know about the past. The Dead Sea Scrolls break down into 3 startling categories: copies of Hebrew scriptures that predate any other known version by centuries, apocryphal works left out of the official Bible, and radical sectarian texts that expose the fierce religious debates of the time. Take the great Isaiah scroll, nearly perfectly preserved, its columns of Hebrew script mirroring the book of Isaiah we know today, but with tiny, haunting differences. A single altered phrase could rewrite centuries of theological interpretation. Then there are the apocryphal writings, texts deemed too controversial or mysterious to make it into mainstream scripture. The Book of Enoch describes fallen angels teaching humans forbidden arts, while the War Scroll paints a chilling prophecy of an apocalyptic battle between the sons of light and sons of darkness. These weren't just stories, they were urgent warnings hidden away like spiritual dynamite. But perhaps most revealing are the sectarian manuscripts like the Community Rule Scroll, which lays out strict codes for a separatist group many believe were the Essenes. Their rituals, their hierarchies, even their meals were dictated with military precision. Imagine a desert monastery where every daily act was preparation for an imminent holy war. What emerges from these fragments isn't just a collection of old texts, it's a battleground of ideologies. The scrolls reveal a Judaism in ferment, with rival sects accusing each other of corruption while awaiting the same Messiah. Some passages drip with paranoia, warning of the wicked priest infiltrating Jerusalem's temple. Others pulse with hope, forecasting a divine reckoning. And threaded through it all are hints of a shadowy teacher, the teacher of righteousness, whose followers may have risked everything to preserve these words as Rome's armies closed in. This wasn't just a library buried in haste, it was a time bomb set to detonate in the modern age. Nestled between the harsh cliffs and the shimmering Dead Sea, the ruins of Qumran tell a silent story, one of isolation, devotion, and perhaps the most audacious act of literary preservation in history. Here, archaeologists uncovered not just caves full of scrolls, but an entire settlement frozen in time. Ritual baths, a scriptorium with inkwells still stained dark, and communal dining halls where devout community once gathered. The prevailing theory, this was home to the Essenes, a radical Jewish sect who may have been the guardians and authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Picture a desert monastery where every sunrise began with ritual purification, where members shared all possessions, and where strict codes governed everything from speech to Sabbath observance. The Essenes weren't just devout, they were dissenters, rejecting the religious authority of Jerusalem's temple and retreating into the wilderness to await divine intervention. Their writings, like the Community Rule Scroll, reveal a group obsessed with purity, predicting an imminent cosmic war between light and darkness. When you read their text, you sense the urgency. These weren't just teachings, they were survival manuals for the apocalypse. But why hide the scrolls? As Roman forces advanced toward Judea in the 1st century, the Essenes likely faced a harrowing choice. Let their sacred texts be destroyed or seal them away like time capsules. The caves became a literary ark, preserving not just scripture, but their radical interpretation of it. Some scholars believe the scrolls were hidden to protect them from Roman pillaging, while others suggest the Essenes themselves buried them as a final act of defiance, ensuring their vision of truth would outlast the empire that sought to erase them. The connection between Qumran's ruins and the scrolls is undeniable. Inkwells found in the scriptorium match the very ink used in the manuscripts. Pottery shards at the site bear the same distinctive style as the jars that held the scrolls. And then there's the chilling twist. Among the texts was a copper scroll, not a spiritual treatise, but a cryptic treasure map listing vast quantities of gold and silver hidden across the Judean wilderness. Was this the Essenes' secret hoard, or evidence of a deeper, more shadowy purpose? What emerges is a portrait of a community living on the knife's edge of history, scribbling prophecies by lamplight as the world outside teetered toward catastrophe. Their scrolls were more than religious documents, they were weapons in an ideological war, carefully concealed so that one day, long after the Romans turned to dust, their voices would rise again from the desert. And now, 2,000 years later, we're left to wonder, did they ever imagine their words would be found, or were they writing not for their own time but for ours? While the Essenes remain the most widely accepted authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, whispers of dissent ripple through academic circles. Some scholars argue the evidence isn't so clear-cut, that these manuscripts might represent a far broader tapestry of Jewish thought, hidden not by a single sect but by a coalition of groups racing against Rome's advancing legions. One provocative theory suggests Jerusalem's temple priests, facing the annihilation of their sacred texts during the Roman siege of 70 CE, orchestrated the scroll's burial as a desperate act of preservation. Imagine high-ranking priests, robes dusty from fleeing through the Judean wilderness, carefully sealing away not just scripture but the very soul of their tradition. Then there's the Jerusalem hypothesis, which posits that the scrolls weren't written at Qumran at all, that the settlement was merely a hiding place for manuscripts smuggled from libraries in the capital. Proponents point to the sheer diversity of writing styles and theological viewpoints in the scrolls, arguing no single community could have produced such a spectrum of ideas. The War Scrolls' militaristic fervor doesn't quite match the Essenes' pacifist reputation, while some liturgical texts echo Pharisee traditions. Could these caves have been a panic room for Judaism itself, where rival factions buried their most precious texts side by side as the temple burned? Other voices propose an even more radical idea, that the scrolls were hidden by a shadowy network of dissenters, zealots perhaps, or apocalyptic preachers who saw Rome's invasion as the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. The Copper Scroll, with its cryptic mentions of hidden treasure, fuels speculation that some texts were stashed not for spiritual reasons but as part of a resistance effort. Yet skeptics counter that the scrolls lack explicit references to the Jewish revolts, and the Essene-like community rules dominate too many manuscripts to ignore. What's undeniable is the heat these debates still generate. Carbon dating and handwriting analysis have only deepened the mystery, revealing scrolls penned over a 200-year span, far longer than any single group's lifespan. Were the caves a time capsule curated across generations, or a final refuge in Judaism's darkest hour? As archaeologists sift through the evidence, one truth emerges: whoever sealed these jars wasn't just hiding scrolls. They were burying a revolution. Among the fragile parchment and leather scrolls, one artifact stands out like a riddle written in metal: the Copper Scroll. Unlike its companions filled with spiritual texts, this scroll is a Chinese letter, pragmatic inventory of hidden treasure, etched onto sheets of copper so thin they had to be cut open like a tin can. Discovered in Cave 3 in 1952, its contents read like a pirate's fever dream: lists of gold, silver, and precious ritual objects buried at 64 locations across the Judean wilderness. But here's the twist: no one has ever found a single item from its cryptic catalogue. The language of the Copper Scroll is a cipher wrapped in mystery. Unlike the literary Hebrew of the other Dead Sea Scrolls, it's written in a sparse, almost bureaucratic dialect with landmarks that either no longer exist or were deliberately obscure. In the ruin that is in the Valley of Achor, it directs: dig down 7 cubits to find 22 talents of silver. Another entry mentions treasures hidden beneath the stairs of the upper reservoir. Were these coded instructions for initiates or desperate notes scribbled under the shadow of Roman siege? The scroll even specifies exact weights: gold bars totaling 65 talents, silver ingots worth 200 amounts, so precise they suggest real, tangible wealth. For decades, treasure hunters and archaeologists have combed the arid hillsides, armed with shovels and ground-penetrating radar. Some believe the hoard belonged to the Jerusalem temple, smuggled out before the Romans sacked it in 70 CE. Others argue it's the legendary wealth of the Essenes, though their ascetic lifestyle makes this unlikely. A more controversial theory: the scroll describes treasures from the First Temple, destroyed 6 centuries earlier, meaning these could be the lost relics of King Solomon himself. Yet every excavation has ended in dust. The valleys and ruins named in the scroll have either vanished under centuries of erosion or were never real places to begin with. Some scholars think the treasure was looted long ago, while others suspect the copper scroll is an elaborate misdirection, a decoy to send Roman soldiers on wild goose chases while the real treasures were spirited away. What makes this metal manuscript truly unique isn't just its content, but its medium. Copper was expensive and labor-intensive to inscribe. Why use it for a treasure map unless the scribe expected it to last millennia? Perhaps the answer lies in the scroll's final, chilling lines. In a dry well at Colet, it states, lies a duplicate of this document. If that second scroll exists, it's still waiting in the darkness, holding secrets even the desert hasn't surrendered. The Dead Sea Scrolls survived 2,000 years not by luck, but by the perfect storm of natural preservation, a silent collaboration between human ingenuity and the desert itself. Unlike ancient texts from humid regions that crumbled into dust, these manuscripts were cradled in one of Earth's most unforgiving climates. The Judean desert is a natural dehydrator, with blistering heat, minimal rainfall, and air so dry it halts decay in its tracks. When scribes sealed the scrolls inside clay jars, some coated with sticky bitumen for extra protection, they essentially created time capsules. The jars blocked light and moisture, while the caves acted as climate-controlled vaults, maintaining stable temperatures year-round. Compare this to the fate of other ancient writings. The Library of Alexandria's scrolls, though meticulously copied, burned or rotted away in Egypt's damp coastal air. Early Christian texts from Rome survive only as fragments, their papyrus eaten by mold. Even the durable Egyptian Book of the Dead often reached modern times faded and brittle. Yet the Dead Sea Scrolls emerged with ink still legible, their leather and papyrus flexible enough to unroll, albeit painstakingly. Some sections had fused together like ancient papier-mâché, but others were so intact that scholars could detect the scribe's handwriting quirks, the shaky lines of a novice, the confident strokes of a master. The real miracle lies in the chemistry of decay, or rather, its absence. Organic materials degrade through oxidation, microbial activity, and enzymatic breakdown, all of which require moisture. In the Dead Sea's hyper-arid environment, these processes stalled. Salt particles in the air may have further inhibited bacteria, while the cave's darkness prevented UV damage. Even the scroll's ink, a carbon-based mixture common in antiquity, bonded stubbornly to the parchment where other inks might have flaked away. Modern conservationists marvel at how these conditions outperform today's archival standards. Museums now replicate the Qumran cave's environment for delicate artifacts, using silica gel and humidity-controlled cases. Yet the scrolls pose a bitter irony. Their survival for millennia hinged on staying hidden, but once exposed to modern air, they began deteriorating rapidly. Early handlers mistakenly used tape and cardboard to reinforce fragments, causing irreversible damage. Now, digitization projects race against time to capture what's left before the very act of studying them erases their secrets forever. What emerges is a paradox. The same climate that preserved the scrolls also isolated them from history, leaving them pristine but enigmatic. Had they been stored in a bustling city, they might have been copied and recopied like the Bible, but also edited, redacted, or destroyed. Instead, the desert acted as a reluctant librarian, safeguarding truths until the world was ready to confront them. Every brittle leaf of parchment whispers the same lesson. Sometimes survival demands disappearing completely. Unrolling the Dead Sea Scrolls is like stepping into a linguistic time machine where Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek letters collide, each telling a different story about faith, culture, and survival. The majority of the texts are written in Hebrew, but not the Hebrew of modern prayer books. This is the ancient, muscular Hebrew of the Bible's original prophets, a language still raw with divine urgency. Yet even here, there's variety. Some scrolls use the blocky, square script familiar from Torah scrolls today. while others preserve the older, angular Paleo-Hebrew alphabet, a deliberate choice, as if the scribes were reaching back to the time of Solomon himself. Then there's Aramaic, the everyday language of the ancient Near East, spoken in marketplaces and royal courts. When sections of the Book of Daniel or Tobit appear in Aramaic, they carry the earthy cadence of lived experience, not just ritual. Aramaic was the tongue of exile, of diaspora, and its presence in the scrolls hints at a Judaism adapting to a changing world. Most haunting are the Aramaic pseudepigrapha, texts like the Genesis apocryphon, which expand biblical stories with vivid details. Imagine a scribe adding dialogue to Noah's flood narrative, his Aramaic script flowing like the very waters he describes. Greek, the language of empires, creeps in at the edges. A few fragments, like a scrap of the 12 minor prophets found at Nahal Hever, reveal Hebrew texts translated into Greek, evidence of Jewish communities navigating a Hellenized world. The Greek letters are tidy, precise, a stark contrast to the fiery Hebrew prophets. Together, these languages form a mosaic of identity: Hebrew for holiness, Aramaic for storytelling, Greek for survival. But the scripts themselves are just as revealing. Some scrolls are penned in elegant, uniform hands, likely the work of professional scribes in Jerusalem's temple circles. Others are rougher, with uneven lines and spelling errors, suggesting hurried copies made by sectarian communities. The Great Isaiah scroll shows both, two distinct scribes working in tandem, one's letters neat as a soldier's ranks, the other's sprawling like desert brush. Even the ink varies. Some texts are jet black, others faded to sepia, depending on the scribe's recipe. This linguistic kaleidoscope shatters any simple narrative of ancient Judaism. The scrolls weren't produced in isolation. They're snapshots of a culture in dialogue with itself and the world. When a Greek-speaking Jew in Alexandria read the Torah, did it feel as alien as a Hebrew psalm would to a Roman soldier? The Dead Sea Scrolls don't just preserve languages, they preserve the tension between them, the quiet wars fought in the curves of every letter. Determining the age of the Dead Sea Scrolls wasn't just academic curiosity, it was a race against skepticism. When the first fragments surfaced in the 1940s, critics dismissed them as medieval forgeries or even modern hoaxes. Proving their antiquity required a detective's toolkit, ancient handwriting analysis, cutting-edge science, and even the occasional stroke of luck. Paleography, the study of historical handwriting, became the first key. Scholars pored over the scrolls' letter shapes, comparing them to dated inscriptions from pottery shards and coins. Hebrew script evolved noticeably over centuries, and the scrolls' mix of styles painted a vivid timeline. Some texts, like the Paleo-Hebrew portions of the Book of Exodus, echoed scripts from King Hezekiah's era 800 years earlier, suggesting these were copies of older originals. Others, like the flowing Herodian script in the Isaiah scroll, matched handwriting from the decades around Jesus' lifetime. The scribes' quirks told their own story. A stroke slanted here, a letter squeezed there, signatures of individual hands working under the shadow of Rome's rise. But ink and parchment can deceive, so science stepped in. Radiocarbon dating, revolutionary in the 1950s, analyzed the scroll's organic materials. A scrap of linen wrapping from cave 1 yielded a date between 168 B.C.E. and 233 C.E., while the Great Isaiah scroll's parchment landed squarely in the 2nd century B.C.E. Later tests refined these ranges, confirming most scrolls were penned between the 3rd century B.C.E. and the 1st century C.E., centuries older than any surviving biblical manuscripts known at the time. Yet the most poetic evidence came from history itself. Coins found at Qumran's ruins spanned the reign of Herod the Great to the Jewish revolt, aligning perfectly with the scroll's proposed dates. Even the ink told a tale. Carbon-based recipes matched those described by Roman authors like Pliny the Elder. When scholars cross-referenced these methods, the conclusion was inescapable. These weren't medieval copies or clever fakes, but original voices from Judaism's most turbulent era. The dating did more than confirm authenticity. It shattered assumptions. Before the scrolls, the oldest complete Hebrew Bible was the Aleppo Codex from the 10th century CE. Suddenly, scholars held texts 1,000 years older with nearly identical wording, proof of the Bible's astonishing textual stability. But the scrolls also contained variants, like an alternate version of Jeremiah shorter than the canonical one, revealing a time when scripture was still fluid, still breathing. Every dated fragment became a timestamp on Judaism's evolution, a snapshot of faith in motion. Science could pinpoint when the scrolls were written, but not why they survived. That mystery lingers in the desert air where time itself seems to pause. The scroll's age isn't just a number, it's a bridge to voices that refused to be silenced, scribblers who somehow knew their words would outlast empires. Of all the Dead Sea Scrolls, none commands attention like the great Isaiah scroll, a 22-foot-long parchment so perfectly preserved, it feels like the ancient scribe just set down his pen moments ago. Unrolled in 1948, this wasn't just another fragment. It was the entire book of Isaiah, all 66 chapters, written in 54 columns of crisp Hebrew script. For scholars, it was like discovering a photograph of someone they'd only known through descriptions. Here, suddenly, was the prophet's voice unchanged, unedited from a time when the Second Temple still stood in Jerusalem. What makes this scroll revolutionary isn't just its age, dating to around 125 BC, but its eerie resemblance to the Isaiah we know today. When compared to the Masoretic text, the authoritative Hebrew Bible codified 1,000 years later, the two versions match with near-perfect harmony. Word after word, verse after verse, the message remains startlingly consistent. This wasn't just a theological win, it was proof that scribes had copied sacred texts with almost surgical precision across centuries. Yet tucked within that consistency lie tiny, tantalizing variants, a missing, and here an altered verb tense there, each one a potential key to reinterpreting prophecies that shaped Judaism and Christianity. The scroll's physical state is a marvel in itself. The leather parchment, though brittle, survived with minimal holes or fading, its ink still dark enough to read without enhancement. Scribes used a carbon-based ink, mixing soot with gum Arabic, and their reed pens left strokes so precise we can trace their pressure and speed. Two distinct scribes worked on the scroll, one meticulous, his letters uniform as soldiers on parade, the other looser, his lines sloping like desert wind. Their collaboration suggests this wasn't some hidden sectarian project, but a master copy, perhaps meant for public use, but the real magic lies in the margins. Faint markings, dots, strokes, and occasional corrections reveal an ancient editing process. Some verses show signs of deliberate updating, as if later hands gently nudge the text toward clarity. In Isaiah 53, the famous suffering servant passage, a single altered preposition could shift centuries of messianic interpretation. Was this scroll a living document, subtly evolving even as it was revered? For biblical scholars, the great Isaiah scroll is both anchor and earthquake. It anchors the Masoretic tradition, proving its reliability across a millennium of transmission. Yet it also shakes assumptions, showing that even sacred texts breathed and shifted in their earliest forms. When Isaiah's voice cries, "Prepare the way of the Lord," we're no longer reading a medieval copy. We're hearing an echo from the desert, unmediated, urgent, as if the prophet himself had just unrolled the parchment and begun to speak. For years, the Dead Sea Scrolls were trapped in a different kind of cave, not one of stone and shadows, but of academic gatekeeping and bureaucratic gridlock. The moment these ancient texts fell into scholars' hands, a new battle began. Who had the right to study them, publish them, and ultimately control the narrative? What should have been a triumph of archaeology became a decades-long saga of secrecy. where rivalries and egos kept the world's most important biblical discoveries locked away. The initial team of scholars assembled in the 1950s was small, just 7 men, led by Dominican priest Roland de Vaux, handpicked to piece together the thousands of fragments. But as years stretched into decades with no publications in sight, whispers grew into outcry. Researchers outside the inner circle accused the team of hoarding the scrolls while conspiracy theories swirled. Were they hiding texts that contradicted Christianity, suppressing revelations about Jesus? The truth was less dramatic but equally frustrating. A mix of perfectionism, territorialism, and sheer overwhelming workload had created a bottleneck. Some fragments sat in drawers for 30 years, studied by only a handful of eyes. Then came the bombshell. In 1991, 2 scholars outside the official team, Martin Abegg and Herschel Shanks, used a reconstructed concordance to publish unauthorized transcripts of unpublished scrolls, blowing the gates wide open. The academic world erupted. Establishment scholars cried foul, while critics hailed it as liberation. The controversy forced the scroll's custodians to finally release all remaining texts, but the damage was done. Trust had fractured, and the scroll's legacy was forever tied to the question, who gets to decide when history is ready to be told? Meanwhile, the delays had fertilized wild speculation. Without access, fringe theorists filled the void with claims the Vatican was censoring the scrolls, or that they held alternate gospels proving Jesus was married. In reality, the unpublished texts were often mundane, more community rulebooks than theological dynamite. But the secrecy had done its work, casting long shadows where light might have dispelled myth. Today, digitization projects have made the scrolls more accessible than ever, yet the scars remain. The story of their suppression isn't just about academic politics, it's a cautionary tale about knowledge, power, and who controls the door to the past. When a young Bedouin tossed that stone in 1947, he didn't just uncover ancient texts, he unleashed a modern drama, proving that some battles over the Dead Sea Scrolls aren't fought with ink and parchment, but with access and authority. Among the many controversies swirling around the Dead Sea Scrolls, few have burned as persistently as the myth of Vatican suppression, the idea that shadowy forces within the Catholic Church conspired to lock away certain scrolls because they threatened Christian doctrine. This theory took root in the decades when access to the manuscripts was tightly controlled, feeding off genuine academic frustration and transforming it into something far more dramatic. Rumors spread that the scrolls contained explosive accounts of Jesus' life, alternative gospels, or evidence undermining core Christian beliefs, all allegedly buried to protect the Church's authority. But what's the real story behind these claims? The truth is less sensational but no less revealing. While it's accurate that the initial team of scholars included Catholic priests like Roland de Vaux, their slow publication pace wasn't a conspiracy, it was a combination of painstaking methodology and sheer logistical chaos. Imagine trying to reconstruct a 5,000-piece jigsaw puzzle where most fragments are smaller than a postage stamp, written in ancient languages and fused together like brittle lace. The team's meticulousness bordered on perfectionism, but their secrecy wasn't sinister. It was academic territorialism at its most frustrating. Yet the delay created a vacuum, and nature abhors those. Without transparency, fringe theories rushed in. Books and documentaries began claiming the Vatican was hiding scrolls that depicted Jesus as a Pharisee, or that revealed early Christian rituals at odds with later doctrine. Some even suggested the scrolls contained prophecies about the Church's future corruption. But when the full texts were finally released in the 1990s, no such bombshells emerged. Instead, scholars found more sectarian rulebooks, apocryphal psalms, and biblical commentaries fascinating for historians, but hardly the theological dynamite conspiracy theorists had promised. The real irony, the Dead Sea Scrolls actually reinforced the historical credibility of the Hebrew Bible, which the Vatican has always revered. The near-identical wording of Isaiah across centuries undercuts claims of wholesale biblical tampering. If anything, the scrolls should have been a triumph for the church proof of Scripture's stability. Instead, the secrecy surrounding them became a cautionary tale about how opacity breeds myth. One particularly stubborn myth involves the infamous Vatican secret archives. While it's true that the Vatican Library holds vast collections of historical documents, there's zero evidence that suppressed Dead Sea Scroll fragments were smuggled there. Every known Qumran manuscript has been accounted for in academic inventories, with the majority housed in Jerusalem's Israel Museum. The few exceptions are fragments scattered across global institutions due to antiquities market sales, not ecclesiastical intrigue. What this conspiracy theory reveals isn't hidden Vatican agendas, but our own modern anxieties. We want the scrolls to be explosive, to upend traditions, because we're wired to distrust institutions. The reality that they're primarily a window into ancient Jewish thought doesn't satisfy the craving for headline-worthy revelation. So the myths persist not because of evidence, but because they fill the space between what we know and what we imagine could be true. Perhaps the most overlooked fact in all this is that the Vatican has been one of the scroll's most enthusiastic scholarly supporters. Catholic institutions have funded research, hosted conferences, and even digitized fragments. The narrative of suppression collapses under its own weight when you trace the paper trail, but try telling that to the internet. Decades after the scroll's release, the whispers still linger, proving that some caves aren't made of stone. They're built from speculation, and they're much harder to leave behind. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls sent shockwaves through biblical scholarship, not just for Judaism, but for Christianity as well. Here were texts written centuries before Jesus walked the earth, yet pulsating with themes that would later echo through the New Testament messianic hope, apocalyptic judgment, even the concept of a new covenant. The parallels are too striking to ignore. Was this mere coincidence, or did the ideas preserved in these desert caves shape the soil from which Christianity grew? Take the concept of the Messiah. The scrolls brim with messianic expectation, but not the unified vision we might assume. Some texts, like the Damascus document, speak of two messiahs, one priestly, one royal, reflecting the dual leadership of the Qumran community. Others, like the War Scroll, depict a warrior messiah leading the sons of light against darkness. Then there's the mysterious teacher of righteousness, a persecuted leader whose followers believed he interpreted prophecy rightly. Sound familiar? While no direct link exists between this figure and Jesus, the cultural backdrop is undeniable. These scrolls reveal a Judaism teeming with messianic diversity, a world where charismatic leaders and radical interpretations flourished precisely the environment in which Jesus' movement took root. Then there's the scroll's language itself. Phrases like "sons of light," "the way," and "works of the law" appear in both the scrolls and Paul's letters. The community rule's emphasis on repentance and baptism mirrors John the Baptist's preaching. Even the Beatitudes find parallels in the scroll's blessings for the poor in spirit. Some scholars argue these similarities prove direct influence, while others see them as shared idioms of Second Temple Judaism. The truth may lie in between. The scrolls don't mention Jesus or his followers, but they illuminate the thought world that birthed Christianity. Most provocative are the scrolls' apocalyptic visions. The War Scroll's cosmic battle between light and darkness resonates with Revelation's imagery, while the Melchizedek text casts this obscure biblical figure as a heavenly judge, a role some early Christians assigned to Jesus. Even the idea of a final messianic banquet appears in both the scrolls and the Gospels. These themes weren't invented by Christianity. They were in the air, circulating in texts like those hidden at Qumran. Yet crucial differences remain. The scroll sectarians saw themselves as an exclusive elect, while Jesus' message expanded to include outsiders. The Essenes retreated to the desert. Early Christians charged into cities. The scrolls fixate on ritual purity. Paul declares all foods clean. These contrasts matter. They show that while the scrolls and early Christianity drank from the same theological well, they filled their cups differently. What emerges isn't a simple story of influence, but a mosaic of dialogue and divergence. The Dead Sea Scrolls don't contain Christianity in embryo, but they do cast light on the Jewish roots Christians later reinterpreted. When Paul speaks of mysteries once hidden but now revealed, or when the Gospel of John contrasts light and darkness, we're hearing not just new revelation, but the reshaped echoes of an older Jewish conversation, one the desert preserved until the world was ready to listen again. The Dead Sea Scrolls didn't just add footnotes to biblical scholarship, they tore up entire chapters of assumptions and rewrote them in ink 2,000 years old. Before their discovery, the oldest complete Hebrew Bible was the Aleppo Codex from the 10th century CE, leaving scholars to guess how much the texts might have changed over a millennium of copying. Then came the scrolls, thrusting original manuscripts from the Second Temple period into the modern world, and suddenly we could compare. The results were staggering. Take the Great Isaiah Scroll, virtually identical to the Masoretic text we've used for centuries. Here was proof that scribes had preserved sacred words with near-surgical precision across generations. Yet other scrolls revealed tantalizing variants, like a shorter version of Jeremiah missing entire passages, or Psalms arranged in a different order, showing that the Bible wasn't always the fixed entity we know today. These variations expose a vibrant, living tradition of Scripture. Some scrolls blend biblical books with commentary, as if the line between sacred text and interpretation was once fluid. The Psalms scroll from Cave 11 includes hymns absent from the traditional canon, suggesting worship wasn't yet standardized. Even the Torah shows subtle differences. A scroll of Exodus from Qumran inserts extra details about Moses' birth, while Deuteronomy fragments adjust laws about kingship. These aren't errors, they're snapshots of a faith in motion where communities felt authorized to refine and expand their holiest texts. The scrolls force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The Bible didn't descend from heaven fully formed. It was debated, edited, and sometimes contested by the very people who cherished it. Then there's the canon itself. Before Qumran, scholars assumed the Hebrew Bible was firmly set by the 1st century. But the scrolls append that certainty. Alongside every biblical book except Esther, its absence still a mystery. The caves yielded apocryphal works like Enoch and Jubilees texts revered by some Jews but later excluded. Even more striking, the community's own writings, like the Rule of the Community, were copied and preserved with the same care as Genesis or Isaiah. This blurring of categories hints that the idea of Scripture was still flexible, with different groups embracing different collections. Perhaps the scrolls' greatest gift to scholarship is their messiness. They refuse to fit neat theological boxes, revealing a Judaism where multiple versions of truth coexisted. A priest in Jerusalem, a scribe at Qumran, and a philosopher in Alexandria might all call their texts Torah, yet hold strikingly different words in their hands. Modern Bibles present a single, polished narrative, but the Dead Sea Scrolls remind us that beneath that unity lies a richer, more complicated story, one where faith wasn't about having all the answers, but about wrestling with the divine word in all its glorious, untamed variety. The world of Dead Sea Scroll fragments isn't just about ancient secrets, it's also a modern minefield of deception, where forgers have cashed in on the scroll's mystique with stunningly convincing fakes. In recent years, the lucrative market for biblical artifacts has spawned a wave of counterfeit fragments, some so persuasive they fooled top museums and collectors. Take the scandal surrounding the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. In 2018, after proudly displaying 16 purported Dead Sea Scroll fragments for years, the museum was forced to admit a crushing truth: every single one was a clever fake. Scientific analysis revealed inconsistencies in the parchment's aging, while the ink contained modern additives impossible in antiquity. The revelation sent shockwaves through the archaeological world, exposing how easily even experts can be duped when desperation for new discoveries overrides caution. Forgers prey on the scroll's fragmentary nature. Since most authentic manuscripts are in tatters, it's easy to pass off small, unproven pieces as genuine. One common tactic involves aging modern parchment using chemical treatments, then inscribing it with ink formulas that mimic ancient recipes. Some fraudsters even recycle genuine ancient leather, often from unrelated artifacts like Roman sandals, to create a convincing canvas. But the real artistry lies in the text itself. Skilled forgers study published scroll fragments, replicating scribble handwriting styles and content patterns. The most sophisticated fakes include plausible biblical verses or sectarian phrases, tailored to match scholarly expectations. Detecting these frauds requires a mix of high-tech science and old-fashioned detective work. Carbon dating can expose anachronistic materials, while multispectral imaging reveals whether ink has seeped naturally into parchment cracks over centuries or was applied recently. Microscopic analysis checks for modern tools. Steel nibs leave different marks than ancient reed pens. Yet the most telling clues are often textual. Authentic scrolls show subtle linguistic quirks, spelling errors, dialect shifts, even scribble fatigue that forgers rarely replicate perfectly. When a fragment's Hebrew suddenly switches grammar rules mid-sentence or quotes a Bible verse that didn't exist in that form before 70 CE, red flags erupt. The fallout from these scandals has reshaped the antiquities market. Major institutions now demand rigorous provenance trails, rejecting any fragment without documented excavation records. Meanwhile, scholars have grown wary of private collections, where artifacts often surface mysteriously with no archaeological context. Yet the allure of undiscovered scrolls keeps the forgery trade alive. In 2020, Israeli authorities busted a ring selling fake fragments for millions, their workshop stocked with aged parchment and homemade ancient ink. What makes these frauds especially tragic is their ripple effect. Every fake fragment muddying the waters makes it harder to spot legitimate discoveries. When rumors swirl of new scrolls surfacing on the black market, scholars must ask, is this another hoax or could it be the real thing? The Dead Sea Scrolls survived 2 millennia in caves only to face a new threat. Not rats or decay, but human greed, armed with chemistry sets and a talent for deception. The lesson is clear: in the shadows where history and profit collide, not every treasure is what it seems. Preserving the Dead Sea Scrolls for future generations has required a marriage of cutting-edge technology and painstaking care, a race against time to digitize these fragile relics before age and handling erase them completely. The Digital Dead Sea Scrolls project, spearheaded by the Israel Antiquities Authority, isn't just about taking high-resolution photos, it's about creating a virtual time machine. Using custom-designed camera rigs capable of capturing images at 1,200 megapixels, that's 200 times sharper than a standard smartphone, each fragment is photographed under multiple wavelengths of light. The results are startling. Faded letters suddenly leap from the parchment, cracks and stains become maps of the scroll's journey through centuries, and ink compositions reveal where scribes dipped their pens. One breakthrough technique involves multispectral imaging, where scrolls are photographed at different light frequencies, from ultraviolet to infrared. What appears as blank or damaged parchment to the naked eye might, under specific wavelengths, expose hidden characters or corrections scribbled in margins. In some cases, this technology has resurrected entire passages thought lost to time. The Great Isaiah Scroll, for instance, revealed previously unnoticed scribble marks under infrared tiny dots that may have guided later copyists. It's like watching invisible ink appear before your eyes, each spectral band peeling back another layer of history. But digitization isn't just about seeing more, it's about touching less. Traditional scroll study requires unrolling fragile parchment, risking further damage with every movement. Now, 3D scanning allows scholars to virtually unroll digitized fragments on screens, manipulating them without physical contact. Some of the most damaged scrolls, carbonized by time into brittle logs, have been digitally opened for the first time in millennia using micro-CT scans, the same technology used in hospitals to image human organs. The process is delicate. A scroll too damaged to handle physically can be virtually dissected layer by layer, its text reconstructed algorithmically. The real magic happens in the stitching. Thousands of fragments, some no larger than a fingernail, are digitally reassembled using pattern recognition software that matches edges, letter forms, and even the unique texture of animal skins used as parchment. It's a global puzzle-solving effort where a scholar in Tokyo might identify a fragment that fits a gap in a scroll studied in Berlin. The Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls Digital Library, the project's online hub, makes these discoveries accessible to anyone with an internet connection, offering not just images but transcriptions, translations, and scholarly commentary. Accessibility has transformed scroll research. Where once only a handful of privileged academics could examine the originals, now a high school student in Nairobi or a rabbi in Buenos Aires can zoom in on a 2,000-year-old Hebrew letter with museum-quality clarity. The project's latest phase even employs artificial intelligence to predict missing text, analyzing word patterns across scrolls to suggest plausible reconstructions of fragmented passages. Yet this digital revolution comes with poignant irony. The same scrolls that survived 2 millennia in desert caves risk disintegration in our modern climate. Light, humidity, and even the oils on human fingers threaten what time couldn't erase. Digitization isn't just about sharing knowledge, it's a backup plan, ensuring that if the physical scrolls crumble, their words will live on in ones and zeros. The Dead Sea Scrolls endured because they were hidden away. Now, their greatest safeguard might be the opposite, immortality through exposure, as pixels on a screen, waiting for the next curious mind to click and wonder. The desert hasn't finished giving up its secrets. Just when scholars thought the age of Dead Sea Scroll discoveries had passed, a new wave of excavations in the Judean wilderness has unearthed fresh fragments, proof that the caves still hold parchment treasures waiting to be found. In 2021, archaeologists working in the so-called Cave of Horror, named for the skeletons discovered there in the 1960s, made headlines when they pulled a 2,000-year-old biblical scroll from the dust. This wasn't just another fragment, it was the first complete ancient scroll found in 60 years, containing verses from Zechariah and Nahum written in Greek. The discovery shattered assumptions that all major scrolls had already been looted or recovered, sending teams scrambling back to cliffs they'd once considered picked clean. What makes these recent finds extraordinary isn't just their existence, but their condition. Unlike the crumbling fragments of the 1940s, some new pieces emerge almost intact thanks to refined excavation techniques. Archaeologists now use drones equipped with thermal cameras to spot hidden cave openings, while sifting soil through mesh screens catches even fingernail-sized scraps. In 2020, a team discovered a trove of Roman-era coins, arrowheads, and most tantalizingly, a 6,000-year-old mummified child wrapped in cloth, proving these caves were time capsules long before the scrolls were hidden. But the real prize came when they brushed dirt from a tiny parchment roll, a previously unknown psalm, its ink still dark against the leather. The hunt has taken on new urgency as looters armed with metal detectors and black market connections threaten to plunder undiscovered sites. Israel's Antiquities Authority now runs annual salvage expeditions, racing against thieves to survey 500 caves in the Dead Sea region. Their efforts paid off in 2022 with the recovery of a dozen new biblical fragments, including a rare passage from the Book of Ezra. Texts so fragile they crumble at a touch, preserved only by the dry desert air. Some fragments show charring, hinting they were rescued from fires set by Roman soldiers during the Bar Kokhba revolt. Yet the most electrifying possibility remains unconfirmed. Rumors of a 12th cave, its entrance concealed by an earthquake or deliberately sealed. Ground-penetrating radar has detected unnatural voids in cliffs near Qumran, while multispectral scans of existing caves reveal ink traces on walls, perhaps the ghosts of scrolls long since disintegrated. One theory suggests the Copper Scrolls treasure map might lead not just to gold, but to another manuscript cache. Every empty jar found, every scrap of linen wrapping, whispers the same question: what else is out there? The irony is palpable. 2 millennia ago, someone hid these texts to save them from destruction. Today, archaeologists hide their excavation plans to protect them from looters. As teams rappel down sheer cliffs and dodge venomous snakes, they're not just uncovering history, they're continuing an ancient tradition of guardianship, ensuring that whatever the desert still cradles in its dry hands reaches the light on its own terms. The Dead Sea Scrolls taught us that history is never truly finished, only waiting for the right moment to speak. The mystery of why the Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden away in those desert caves has divided scholars for decades, with theories ranging from desperate last-minute escapes to meticulously planned spiritual preservation. One of the most compelling theories points to the looming shadow of Rome's military might. In the 1st century, as Roman legions crushed the Jewish revolt and advanced toward Jerusalem, Jewish sects faced an existential threat not just to their lives but to their sacred texts. The Essenes, if they were indeed the scrolls' guardians, may have bundled their library into clay jars and sealed them in remote caves, ensuring their teachings would survive even if their community did not. Archaeologists have found evidence of Roman camps near Qumran, and charred remnants of some scrolls hint at nearby destruction. Could these caves have been the ancient equivalent of a panic room for scripture, a last-ditch effort to protect the written soul of a faith under siege? Yet another theory suggests the scrolls weren't hidden in haste, but placed in the caves as part of a deliberate ritual, a sacred storage practice. In antiquity, texts viewed as too holy or too dangerous to discard were sometimes buried rather than destroyed. Jewish tradition describes Geniza, a repository for worn-out scriptures, and some scholars argue the Qumran caves served a similar function. The careful sealing of scrolls in jars, some coated with bitumen to repel moisture, implies a reverence beyond mere practicality. Were these texts retired rather than hidden, stored like spiritual batteries meant to recharge future generations? The presence of multiple copies of certain scriptures, along with cryptic sectarian writings, fuels speculation that the community saw these texts as vessels of divine energy, too potent to leave in the open, yet too sacred to burn. Then there's the most tantalizing idea of all, that the scrolls were never meant to be hidden forever, but to resurface at the right moment, a theological time capsule. The community rule scroll speaks of an end of days when the faithful would reclaim their heritage. Could the Essenes have believed their buried library would be discovered by a future generation of the righteous? Some texts, like the War Scroll, read like survival manuals for an apocalyptic future. If so, their act wasn't just preservation, it was prophecy. The strongest evidence may lie in what wasn't hidden. Personal belongings, daily utensils, none of these made it into the caves, only the scrolls. That selectivity suggests purpose, not panic. And yet, the Copper Scrolls treasure map complicates things. If the goal was purely spiritual, why include an inventory of gold and silver? Unless, of course, the material and the divine were intertwined, the wealth of the temple itself, hidden alongside the words meant to sanctify it. Each theory fits some of the puzzle pieces, but none accounts for them all. Maybe the truth is a mosaic, some scrolls buried for protection, others as ritual offerings, a few as messages to the future. What's clear is that whoever sealed those jars believed the words inside were worth more than gold, worth outlasting empires, worth waiting 2,000 years in darkness for the right eyes to read them again. From the moment those first Dead Sea Scroll fragments tumbled out of desert caves, their journey to museum display cases was anything but straightforward, a saga of Bedouin traders, undercover agents, and academic battles that still sparks ethical firestorms today. When the teenage shepherd Muhammad Eddi Hib first brought fragments to a Bethlehem antiquities dealer in 1947, neither realized they were igniting a global scramble that would blend archaeology with high-stakes diplomacy. The initial scrolls changed hands for what now seems laughable. Some reports say as little as $25 per fragment before winding up with Metropolitan Samuel, the Syrian Orthodox Archbishop in Jerusalem, who recognized their biblical significance but had no idea how to authenticate them. His decision to advertise the scrolls in the Wall Street Journal led to their eventual purchase by Israeli archaeologist Yigal Yadin in 1954. A deal shrouded in secrecy because at the time, Jordan controlled East Jerusalem where the Archbishop resided, and Israeli buyers risked confiscation. Yadin's father, famed archaeologist Eliezer Sukenik, had already acquired other scroll fragments during Israel's War of Independence, smuggling them past military checkpoints in his briefcase. These early transactions set the tone for decades of controversy. Who truly owned history when borders shifted like desert sands? By the 1960s, most scrolls were consolidated under Jordanian control at the Rockefeller Museum in East Jerusalem, studied by an international team that included no Jewish scholars, an irony given the text's Jewish origins. That changed dramatically after the Six-Day War in 1967, when Israeli paratroopers seized the museum and inherited its priceless collection overnight. Overnight, the scrolls became national symbols, with fragments like the Temple Scroll displayed as cultural treasures. Yet their new home in Jerusalem's Shrine of the Book, a white-tiled dome resembling the lids of the very jars that preserved them, didn't end disputes over ownership. Palestinian scholars argue the scrolls were illegally appropriated, while Jordan still lists them on its Ministry of Tourism website as looted artifacts. The ethical knot tightens when you consider that most scrolls were found in the West Bank, territory whose legal status remains internationally contested. Outside Israel, the scrolls diaspora tells another tangled tale. The Vatican Library holds fragments acquired decades ago from private collectors, while the British Museum safeguards several pieces donated by the Jordanian government before 1967. In America, the scandal of forged fragments at the Museum of the Bible revealed how collectors' desperation for Dead Sea Scroll relics fueled a black market rife with fakes. Even genuine fragments in private hands raise questions: should sacred texts be auctioned like Renaissance paintings? When a fragment of Genesis sold for $2 million at Sotheby's in 2018, UNESCO condemned the sale as contrary to international heritage ethics. Today, digitization projects have made the scrolls more accessible than ever, yet their physical custody remains contentious. The Israel Antiquities Authority maintains strict protocols for lending fragments, wary of risks ranging from political backlash to humidity damage. Meanwhile, Palestinian archaeologists continue excavating the West Bank's caves, hoping to uncover scrolls that might shift the narrative. The tragedy is that these texts, hidden to unite a community facing annihilation, now find themselves caught in modern divisions. Perhaps their greatest lesson isn't just about ancient Judaism, but about how easily history becomes a pawn in conflicts its authors never imagined. Preserving the Dead Sea Scrolls today is a race against time, a delicate ballet of science and reverence where even a single misplaced breath can damage ink that survived 2 millennia in desert caves. Modern conservation begins with the simplest yet most critical defense: replicating the exact conditions that kept these manuscripts intact for centuries. Inside the Israel Museum's Shrine of the Book, scroll fragments rest in humidity-controlled display cases filled with inert argon gas, shielding the ancient parchment from oxidation. The temperature never fluctuates beyond 64 degrees Fahrenheit, mirroring the stable climate of the Qumran caves. But the real challenge begins when these artifacts must be moved or studied. Conservators wear gloves and masks not just to protect the scrolls from oils and moisture, but to minimize exposure to the very air that now threatens them. Unlike the dry, sterile desert environment, modern humidity causes collagen in the parchment to expand and contract, accelerating deterioration. Handling the scrolls requires tools more suited to a surgical theater than a library. Conservators use soft brushes made of camel hair, a material gentle enough to lift dust without scratching the surface. To unroll brittle fragments, they employ a humidity chamber, where controlled mist relaxes the fibers just enough to separate layers without tearing. Some of the most damaged scrolls, like the charred lumps from the Cave of Horror, can only be examined using non-invasive techniques. Multispectral imaging reveals text hidden beneath carbonized layers, while micro-CT scanners map internal structures without physical contact. Yet even these advanced methods carry risks. Early attempts to read sealed scrolls with X-rays inadvertently exposed them to radiation that faded ink over time, a lesson in how well-intentioned curiosity can backfire. The scroll's greatest enemy isn't neglect but their own fame. Every exhibition, every research request subjects them to vibrations, light exposure, and microscopic stress. After a fragment of the Isaiah scroll displayed in New York showed signs of fading in 2018, curators imposed strict rest periods between viewings, allowing the parchment to recover in darkness like a patient convalescing. Some fragments are now deemed too fragile for display at all. Their replicas printed on custom-made parchment substitutes for public viewing. The irony is profound. The very act of sharing these texts with the world ensures their gradual disappearance. Perhaps the most heartbreaking challenge is the irreversible damage already done in the scroll's early years of modern handling. In the 1950s, scholars used cellophane tape to reinforce fragments, unaware the adhesive would yellow and corrode the parchment. Others flattened scrolls between glass panes, trapping moisture that encouraged mold. Today, conservators painstakingly remove these well-meaning interventions, sometimes spending months on a single square inch. The work is slow, expensive, and often bittersweet, a race to undo past mistakes before time runs out. Digitization offers hope, but it's no panacea. High-resolution scans can't replicate the tactile clues, the texture of the parchment, the scent of the ink, that helps scholars understand how the scrolls were made. And while virtual reunification lets fragments scattered across continents be studied side by side on screens, it can't stop the slow decay of the originals. The Dead Sea Scrolls survived because they were forgotten. Now, their greatest threat might be our relentless desire to know them. In the end, conservation is a paradox, a fight to keep these ancient voices alive, even as our very attention threatens to silence them forever. The Dead Sea Scrolls have seeped far beyond academic journals and museum displays. They've become a cultural obsession, fueling everything from blockbuster novels to conspiracy-laden documentaries. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code might be the most famous example, weaving the scrolls into a tapestry of shadowy Vatican cover-ups and suppressed gospels, but the trend stretches back decades. In 1963, Edmund Wilson's bestseller The Scrolls from the Dead Sea framed them as a bombshell that could redefine Christianity, while more recent thrillers like the Ezekiel Code spin tales of apocalyptic prophecies hidden in the scroll's cryptic passages. Hollywood, never one to resist a good mystery, has taken liberties. Two films like Indiana Jones and The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull flirt with the idea of ancient texts holding supernatural power, even if they swap Qumran for South American jungles. Documentaries often amplify the intrigue, sometimes at the cost of accuracy. The History Channel's Ancient Aliens famously suggested the scrolls contain references to extraterrestrial visitors, while pseudo-archaeology specials cherry-pick phrases about heavenly beings to fit sensational narratives. Even reputable networks sometimes lean too heavily on the scroll's secrets, framing them as a puzzle that could upend religion rather than a collection of texts that enrich our understanding of history. The Copper Scroll, with its treasure map aura, gets particularly mythologized. Some programs speculate wildly about its lists of gold, ignoring the scholarly consensus that it likely describes temple valuables hidden during wartime. Then there's the music world. Leonard Cohen's song Who by Fire borrows imagery from the scroll's liturgical poetry, while metal bands like the Sword weave Qumran's apocalyptic themes into their lyrics. Video games like Assassin's Creed drop scroll fragments as collectibles, reinforcing the idea of them as artifacts of hidden knowledge. Even comic books get in on the act. DC's The Demon series pits its hero against villains seeking the scroll's forbidden power. What's fascinating is how these pop culture portrayals often eclipse reality. Few outside academia know about the scroll's actual content, the community rule's meticulous laws, the quiet beauty of the Thanksgiving hymns. Instead, the focus stays fixed on imagined controversies, lost gospels, secret codes, earth-shattering revelations. The irony, the scroll's true power lies in their ordinariness, the way they capture the fears, hopes, and daily rhythms of a community long gone. They're not about Hollywood's grand conspiracies, but about scribes huddled in lamplight, copying texts they believed might outlast empires. Yet pop culture's love affair with the scrolls isn't all distortion. It keeps them alive in the public imagination, sparking curiosity that leads some to dig deeper. After the Da Vinci Code surged in sales, libraries reported spikes in requests for actual scroll translations. Maybe that's the scroll's final irony. They were hidden to preserve truth, but it's the myths that keep them remembered. In the end, whether framed as sacred texts or alien artifacts, their legacy endures not just in scholarly debates, but in the stories we can't stop telling about them. Even after decades of study, the Dead Sea Scrolls cling stubbornly to their secrets, leaving scholars with tantalizing gaps in our understanding. Among the most frustrating mysteries is the identity behind certain anonymous text voices that speak from the parchment without names. Take the enigmatic teacher of righteousness, a figure mentioned in the scrolls as a spiritual leader persecuted by a corrupt priesthood. Was he a historical person like the Essene leader Menachem the Essene, or a symbolic archetype? Some texts describe his suffering in vivid detail, yet no external records confirm his existence. Even more perplexing are the sectarian manuscripts, rigorous rulebooks for a community that never identifies itself outright. The language parallels descriptions of the Essenes by ancient historians like Josephus, but without a smoking gun, a scroll that declares we are the Essenes. The connection remains just out of reach. Then there's the question of undiscovered caves. Despite extensive surveys of the Qumran cliffs, archaeologists suspect more manuscripts could still lie hidden in the Judean desert's labyrinth of caverns. Recent excavations have turned up scroll fragments as far south as Masada, suggesting the cache at Qumran might be just one node in a broader network of hiding places. Infrared scans of cliffs near the Dead Sea reveal unnatural voids that could be sealed chambers, while Bedouin oral traditions speak of a golden cave rumored to hold more treasures. The Copper Scroll's mention of a duplicate copy stashed in a dry well at Kholat only fuels the speculation. Could an entire secondary library be waiting beneath the dust? Perhaps the most immediate challenge lies in the untranslated fragments. Thousands of scraps, some no larger than a postage stamp, sit in museum drawers awaiting decipherment. Many are too damaged or faded for the naked eye, their ink eroded to ghostly traces. Advanced imaging techniques have resurrected some texts, like a previously unknown psalm discovered through multispectral analysis in 2020, but others resist even technology. A handful of fragments bear unfamiliar scripts, possibly early cryptographic writing or regional dialects lost to time. One scrap, catalogued as 7Q5, sparked a firestorm when a scholar claimed it contained a Greek reference to Jesus, though most experts now dismiss it as misread text. The greatest unanswered question might be the simplest: why these texts? Why did a community facing annihilation choose to save these particular writings, some biblical, some devotional, some startlingly original, while others were left to vanish? Every unread line, every rumored cave, every unnamed scribe is a thread in a tapestry we're still learning to see. The desert gave up its scrolls reluctantly, and it seems determined to keep a few last secrets to itself. Academic battles over the Dead Sea Scrolls have raged with the intensity of desert storms, splitting scholars into opposing camps over how to interpret even the most cryptic passages. Take the Apocalyptic War Scroll, which describes a final 40-year battle between the Sons of Light and Sons of Darkness. Some researchers insist this reflects the Essenes' literal expectation of cosmic war, pointing to their isolationist practices as preparation for divine intervention. Others argue it's purely symbolic, a spiritual allegory for internal struggles between virtue and sin. The debate turns explosive when linked to history. Were these prophecies reacting to Roman occupation or echoing older conflicts from the Maccabean revolt? Manuscript stains become Rorschach tests, with each scholar seeing their own theory in the inkblots. Then there's the infamous pierced Messiah controversy. A single fragmented line in the scrolls, barely more than a few letters, was reconstructed by one team to read, "They will put to death the Messiah," sparking claims it foreshadowed Jesus' crucifixion. Rival scholars immediately countered that the fragment was misread, likely referencing a royal figure from the Psalms. The dispute grew so heated that symposiums devolved into shouting matches, with accusations of Christian bias clashing with charges of academic obstinacy. At stake isn't just ancient syntax, but the scroll's role in the grand narrative of religious history. Were they merely Jewish sectarian documents, or did they whisper hints of messianic ideas that Christianity would later amplify? Even the scroll's connection to the Essenes, long considered settled, faces relentless challenges. The traditional view, championed by early researchers like Roland de Vaux, ties the Qumran settlement's ritual baths and scriptorium directly to Essene life. But revisionists point out that neither the scrolls nor the ruins explicitly name the Essenes, while some texts contradict Josephus' descriptions of the sect. Alternative theories bloom like desert wildflowers after rain. Maybe Qumran was a military fortress repurposed by refugees, or a commercial pottery workshop that stored scrolls during the Jewish revolts. The fiercest clashes erupt over carbon dating discrepancies, where scientific teams feud over margin of error calculations, like detectives arguing over a cold case's timeline. Theological interpretations ignite even hotter passions. When a scroll fragment echoed language from the Gospel of Mark, some proclaimed it proof of Christianity's Jewish roots. Detractors fired back that the similarity was generic first-century Judaism, shared common phrases the way modern political slogans overlap. Meanwhile, Orthodox Jewish scholars spar with secular historians over whether the scrolls represent mainstream Second Temple Judaism or the fringe beliefs of a breakaway group. Each side wields philology and archaeology like dueling swords, parsing verb tenses and pottery shards with equal fervor. What makes these academic feuds more than ivory tower squabbles is their real-world ripple effects. Textbook chapters get rewritten, museum exhibits redesigned, and Sunday school lessons revised based on which interpretation gains traction. A single contested phrase like "the teacher of righteousness" or "the last priest" can tilt our understanding of ancient Judaism's diversity. The scrolls refuse to yield easy answers, leaving scholars no choice but to keep arguing, testing, and when the desert yields another fragment, starting the battle anew. After 70 years of study, one truth emerges: certainty is the rarest artifact of all. The Dead Sea Scrolls didn't just rewrite chapters of history, they tore open an entirely new way of understanding the ancient world, leaving no field untouched. For archaeologists, these fragile manuscripts revolutionized the study of Second Temple Judaism, transforming vague historical references into vivid, tangible evidence. Before the scrolls, descriptions of Jewish sects like the Essenes came solely from outsiders like Josephus or Philo voices, filtered through Roman or Hellenistic lenses. Suddenly, researchers held first-hand accounts penned by the communities themselves. The scrolls' strict purity laws, liturgical calendars, and even their meticulous scribal practices revealed a Judaism far more diverse and dynamic than textbooks had assumed. Archaeology gained more than artifacts. It recovered voices, each line of text a footprint in the spiritual landscape of 2,000 years ago. Theological paradigms shifted just as dramatically. For Jewish scholars, the scrolls provided an unbroken link to the Judaism of the late Second Temple period, illuminating debates that shaped rabbinic tradition. The near-identical wording of the great Isaiah scroll to later Masoretic texts validated the astonishing accuracy of textual transmission, while alternate versions of books like Jeremiah proved scripture wasn't always static. Rabbis pored over the sectarian commentaries, recognizing echoes of later midrashic techniques, proof that interpretive traditions ran deeper than imagined. Meanwhile, Christian theologians grappled with the scroll's messianic imagery, realizing that concepts like the Son of God or the End of Days weren't unique to early Christianity, but part of a broader Jewish conversation. The scrolls didn't undermine faith, they enriched it, showing how religious ideas evolve in dialogue with their time. Historians, too, found their narratives upended. The scrolls' apocalyptic fervor, once dismissed as fringe, now appears central to understanding Jewish resistance movements like the Zealots. Their descriptions of corrupt priests and fractured temple politics align with Josephus' accounts of the era's turmoil, but with an insider's urgency. Even the dry inventory lists names, dates, grain allowances, painted a world where the sacred and mundane intertwined. A receipt for olive oil might sit beside a psalm, reminding us that faith then, as now, was lived in the details. Beyond academia, the scrolls reshaped public imagination. They proved that ancient texts aren't just relics, but living conversations, ones we're still invited to join. When a teenager's tossed stone unearthed them, he didn't just crack open a clay jar, he shattered the illusion that history is ever truly finished. Every faded letter whispers the same truth: the past is always waiting to surprise us. The Dead Sea Scrolls persist as one of history's most tantalizing invitations, a collection of fragile manuscripts that refuse to surrender all their secrets. Even now, decades after their discovery, they hover at the intersection of faith, scholarship, and mystery, challenging everything we thought we knew about the past while hinting at truths we're still piecing together. Their impact isn't just academic, it's cultural, spiritual, and deeply human. These scrolls shattered assumptions about the Bible's unchanging nature, revealing a time when scripture was fluid, debated, and alive with multiple voices. They introduced us to long-lost communities like the Essenes, whose radical devotion echoes across millennia, and forced theologians to grapple with the messy, vibrant origins of ideas that shaped civilizations. What keeps the scrolls relevant isn't just their age, it's their unfinished story. Every technological breakthrough, from multispectral imaging to AI-assisted reconstruction, teases out new fragments of meaning. A faded line here, a corrected word there, each tweak nudges our understanding of ancient Judaism, early Christianity, and the universal human impulse to preserve what matters most. The scrolls remind us that history isn't a static monument but a conversation, one where even the quietest voice ascribes marginal note. A community's hymn can disrupt grand narratives. And then there's the sheer drama of their survival. These texts outlasted empires, wars, and the slow crush of time because someone 2,000 years ago believed they were worth hiding. That act of faith or desperation resonates today. In a world drowning in digital noise, the scrolls are anchors, tangible, fragile, yet enduring. They ask us what we'd choose to save if everything else burned. The adventure isn't over. With fragments still undeciphered and caves unexplored, the next groundbreaking discovery might be a shovel's thrust away. That's the scroll's true gift, not just the answers they've given, but the questions they keep alive. Whether you're a scholar tracing the evolution of monotheism or a curious viewer drawn to ancient mysteries, these texts invite you to lean closer, so don't let the conversation end here. Dive into the Leon Levy Dead Sea Scrolls digital library, where high-resolution images let you scrutinize every stroke of ink like a detective. Visit exhibitions that bring these relics to life. Standing before a display case, you'll feel the weight of centuries. Or simply sit with a translation, letting the words of a long-vanished community speak across time. The scrolls waited 2,000 years to be found. Now it's your turn to uncover what they're saying.